Like Chris said, I'm Joseph Miller, and we're going to be talking about GRC Engineering as a solo operator, which is a job I didn't know I had, funny enough. Some of you might know me already as Priceless Pancake. I'm in the Simply Cyber live streams a lot in the Discord, things like that. So you may know me from there, but so let's get started. So before I do get started, I want to go ahead and give a disclaimer. All the content here are my own thoughts. The thoughts and opinions expressed in this presentation are my own. They don't represent the thoughts or views of CGI Federal or Study GRC. All right, so a little bit about me is, first off, I am the default Oblivion remastered Nord character, apparently, which I thought was pretty funny when I first booted up the game. I work for CGI Federal. We're one of the top 10 government contractors in the US. I don't know about the world. I am an ISSO. Right now I'm focused on our internal CMMC program, as well as a little bit of ConMon, continuous monitoring for FedRAMP. I have 6 years of IT and cybersecurity experience, and this ranges from help desk all the way to being the head of cybersecurity for a company, and then going over to being an ISSO now, right? And then if, like many other in our profession, I play way too many video games, hence me realizing that I looked like the Nord from Oblivion. Hey, Phil, what's up, man? Good to see you. All right, so before we can really understand GRC engineering, we need to talk about the components of what it is, right? So I'm going to start with GRC. Some of you may know this, so just bear with me on it. So first, I want to start with the G, which is governance, right? Governance is all about the policies, standards, procedures, and whatnot set by the organization. These can be common to the industry. They can be unique to your specific organization, or they can be influenced by some sort of regulations, right? A good couple of examples of governance policies or procedures are going to be things like conflict of interest policy, risk management policy, ethical guidelines, acceptable use, things like that. Then we'll go to the R, which is risk. Risk is basically about looking at all potential risks to the organization from a technical standpoint, as well as a natural standpoint, and mitigating those. One of the things that people tend to kind of forget when it comes to risk is that risk isn't just the script kiddie in the library. It isn't just the APT. It's a hurricane hitting your organization, right? It's a tornado, an earthquake, a sprinkler system that hasn't been tested properly, right? So there's a lot more to risk than just the technical aspect. Risk is a continuous process that spans the entire life cycle of an organization's life. You have to constantly manage your risk. If you're not managing your risk, you're going to get popped. There's a good chance you're going to get popped when you are. So, what do you expect to happen when you're not? And then we have compliance, right? So compliance is basically ensuring that you're following all the rules set externally by organizations such as the government, or internally, based off your governance policies, based off of what your leadership has decided needs to be done within the organization. One thing that I like to really point out to people that I think is extremely important is that compliance does not equal security, and security does not equal compliance, right? You can be compliant fully to all 110, or you can have 110 score in CMMC, be completely compliant, and still not follow best practices to a T, still not follow security practices that might be best for your organization, right? So that's just kind of something I like to point out and make sure that people are aware of when it comes to that compliance piece, because a lot of people tend to think that, oh, I'm compliant, that means everything's cool. It doesn't mean that. So now we're going to talk about blue teaming. So what's blue teaming? Blue teaming is basically your IT security defense, right? They're the people that defend your organization from cybersecurity threats. And I have 3 important aspects here that I want to go over with them. And the first is protect. So protecting is all about securing the environment from any incoming threats and building the security of the environment to beat those threats as they come, right? So a good example might be MFA, for example. You want to make sure that only the right people have access into your organization. Maybe IP whitelisting, so you can make sure that those people, if you use a VPN, they have to come from the VPN or IP, things like that, just to give you a little bit more protection. Next, we have monitor. So monitoring is all about ensuring that Big Brother's always watching your environment, right? This is made a lot more possible with things like SIM tools. And if you're a solo operator, like I was for a long time, if you're lucky, you'll get enough resources to get a external SOC, right? Like an MSSP who's watching that for you. or you might just have to, watch the scene yourself and hope for the best. And then last is respond, right? So monitor leads into respond, because once you found something that could potentially negatively impact the organization, you need to make sure that you are responding to all potential incidents and breaches with the appropriate protocols, the right procedures, the right policies, including the right people, things like that. Let's see here. All right, so now that we've gone through those, we can talk about GRC engineering itself, right? So what's GRC engineering? Funnily enough, until I talked to Chris, I didn't know that the job I'd been doing for 6 years had a name, which I thought was really interesting. We were kind of brainstorming about what I could do the presentation on, and it turns out that what I'd been doing is something that other people put a name to. But what's the definition, right? So reading it off: integrating compliance and security operations in a continuous, systematic way. But what does that mean? Essentially, just it's making sure that the rules in place are followed to mitigate risks to your organization by bringing compliance and security together into one. Which leads me to the next slide, GRC by design. So one of the most important parts of GRC engineering is making sure that you're weaving GRC and Blue Team together from the very beginning, from the very start of the program all the way to the end, right? Thanks, Chris. I call this GRC by design. I don't know if I made that term. I don't know if I coined it, but pretend that I did, because it makes me feel really cool and special. So we're just going to say that I coined GRC by design, start using it, make it cool. But essentially, if you're not creating the environment with GRC and security in mind from the very beginning, you're already behind. By the time you start getting things implemented up to par the way that you need it to be, you're going to be behind. There's going to be people, or there's going to be threats already in the organization that you weren't prepared for. All right, so a little bit of a longer one here. And these are the skills and traits that are going to help you be a good GRC engineer. These are kind of what you're looking for, what you want to focus on while you're studying up, right? So the first GRC skill is policy writing. So policy writing is translating rules into actionable items that have to be followed. This can be done with having employees agree to a policy and then ensuring that there are repercussions if the policy's not followed, right? So if you don't have, or if you use, acceptable use, for example, if you use your computer in a way you're not supposed to, you can get in trouble. You could get fired, you could get written up, so on and so forth. Then we have risk assessments. Risk assessments are really important. I've done them, risk is in the name, GRC. And these are essentially just analyzing the threats to your organization and making sure that you understand the impact and how it could affect the organization as a whole, right? The thing that I like to make sure that people remember is the formula for risk, which is likelihood plus impact equals risk, right? So one thing that's important whenever you're doing a risk assessment is ensuring that you're not blowing things out of proportion or not giving things enough attention. And doing that is a great way to do that is by saying, well, how likely is it to happen? Well, I live in the center of the country and a hurricane's not going to hit here. So the likelihood is 0 to 1, depending on how you do it. But what would the impact be? Well, the impact would be a 5 if we got destroyed, but it's nothing. Basically, it's not going to happen. Then the third skill for GRC is communication. So communication is essentially being able to explain the security needs as well as the controls and requirements to all stakeholders in the organization, all the way from the C-suite down to the interns, right? You need to make sure that they have an understanding of not only what the policy is, not only what the controls are, but why they're there. And you need to get that buy-in not only from upper management, but from everyone. That way it gives a more seamless transition into what you're trying to do. So now we're going to talk about the traits of a good GRC engineer, which are strategic thinking. It's seeing the big picture, right? So if you're just focusing down on one policy, one procedure, one control, one framework, and not zooming out and looking at the environment as a whole, you're not only doing yourself, but the company a disservice, because you're not actually putting things together like a jigsaw puzzle looking at the box. It's like you're trying to put them together without the picture. You can do it, but it's not as impactful, not as quick, not as good, right? So then we are going to go to the Blue Team skills. So the first is threat detection. So this is using tools to spot anomalies in an environment. This can be done with things like a SIM server or an EDR panel that gives you alerts. Just saying, hey, something suspicious has happened, something's been downloaded, or anything like that. Flakinator, sorry. But the other important thing is to make sure that these are set up correctly, right? You need to make sure that the alerts are going to the right people. You're getting the proper alerts. You're not getting false positives. So you just, make sure everything's set up properly when you are doing that detection. Then we have incident response. This is going to come up a lot. And this is just responding to incidents properly, or once the threat has been upgraded. Like I said before, you're going to want to make sure you're following proper policies, standards, procedures, and bringing in the right people. If you're a solo operator, it could just be you and the C-suite and the attorneys. It could be that level. It could be a small team. It could be a lot, 2 separate teams, 3, 4. But typically I've been as a solo operator, it is typically much smaller. And then we have forensics. So forensics is important because it's about investigating breach origins, such as Excel macros or Excel with macros causing some kind of issue to a device, downloading something it doesn't need to, phishing campaign directed at your organization, things like that. It's important that you're able to actually go in and, if not immediately when you go or when you find it, after everything's been taken care of, go back and figure out where that came from. You don't necessarily need to know this came from China, this came from South America, things like that. But what you do need to know is, did it come from email? Did it come from this website? Things like that. For example, we had somebody who clicked on a link to a Navy site and downloaded a Navy Excel. And, from there, they just did their work. Well, it turns out that what they clicked on was a Google sponsored link, which means that anyone can pay money to put it there. And what they didn't realize was that it wasn't a real Navy site. So they downloaded an Excel, so they thought. And when things like that happen, you have to be able to get in there and actually find out where it is, block the site, report it, things like that. So moving on to the traits, because I talk forever. The first one is quick thinking. It's really important to be able to think quickly in the event of a breach to ensure that you're doing things like making sure accounts get blocked, services are taken down, servers are shut off, just ensuring that you get everything that needs to be done as quickly as possible to keep yourself secure before you start really getting into the investigation, really starting to remediate and figure things out. The next would be keeping calm under pressure. While you're thinking quickly, your brain's going to start racing, right? You could start freaking out, but you got to just, take a couple breaths, calm down, because you can't think quickly and you can't think properly if you're freaking out. As a responder, you have to stay cool under pressure. Even if everyone else around you is on fire, you be the dog in the middle of the meme of the dog in the middle of the fire. Everything's fine. We got this, right? We got this. And then we got problem solving, right? So finding new ways to resolve issues is really important in our ever-changing environment, because what worked 2 days ago might not work today. What worked 2 months ago might not work today, right? Things change, environments change. And a good example of that is when I had a removable media policy in place that was working in Azure until suddenly it wasn't. And, we needed to fix that real quick. All right. So this is what I like to call the overlapping cycle of defense. One thing that I do want to point out is that a cycle is not a perfect representation of it. Some of these can kind of build on each other and intertwine. And towards the end, I'll kind of go through that a little bit. But essentially, it's a cycle where GRC and Blue work together to create environments, continuously update, and keep those environments safe. And it starts with the GRC team planning, right? So this is where the GRC team is going to design a blueprint for a secure system. It could be for the system as a whole. It could be for a single control, right? But the idea is that the GRC team is going to plan. They're going to figure out what needs to happen for, what regulations they have to follow, what upper management wants for the company, so on and so forth. And they're going to start putting those into policies. Well, whether they've written them or not, they probably won't by then. They'll just start writing them up, but they'll tell the Blue team, okay, here's what we need to have in place to be compliant, right? So that's where it moves over to the Blue team builds. So the Blue team building is all about either building the environment or building controls using, following controls that might be required for regulations, following policies created based off of laws, things like that, right? It could also be, this could be building up the entire environment from scratch. It could just be adding one or two controls in. It's just, like I said, it's a cycle. You're going to notice that new things need to happen as new regulations come or new things change. From building, we go to blue team guarding, right? So this is where the blue team's monitoring and protecting the environment on a day-to-day basis, basically 24/7. This is, if you're a solo operator, you getting alerts from your SIM, you getting alerts from Microsoft. If you're using Azure, I'm going to use Azure and CMMC a lot because that's kind of what I'm more familiar with. But basically just getting your alerts, going in there and guarding against the system. Putting in, controls to stop things ahead of time, reacting to those, and, just ensuring that you're there, you're the guard, you're the watchman standing on the wall. And from guarding, this goes to our incident response, right? Eventually, you're going to have a breach. There's going to be a breach. There's going to be an incident, right? It's part of our industry. As Jerry always says over at Simply Cyber, it's cyber resiliency, not cybersecurity, because you can't be 100% secure, right? So at this point, this is where the blue team starts recovering, right? They call in a meeting with any of the stakeholders relevant. If you're a solo operator, again, like I said, it could be you and a few other people. Maybe you have a couple people on your team. Maybe there's a whole IR team, a whole blue team, whatever. Regardless, you're going to have to go into incident response and you're going to have to get in there quick, right? It could involve legal. It could involve just internal. You might have to report to the DoD or to the customer. So yeah, it's really important there. And then where GRC actually comes into incident response is that once the incident has been dealt with, the GRC team and the blue team can actually look at what happened together and figure out what controls that we could put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again, right? In a perfect world. But when you're a solo operator, it's kind of just, okay, here's what happened. Maybe I can talk to a few people. I'm going to fill in these gaps. But regardless of how big your team is, it's still the same concept, right? A lot of this is the same regardless of size of team. I'm just coming from my experience as a solo operator, right? And so from incident response, we have our GRC assessment. So this is where the GRC team evaluates the effectiveness of the controls or of the controls that have been put in place to mitigate the issue that just happened, the updated controls, new controls, removal of controls, right? This is also done on a periodic basis. This could be a risk assessment. This could be an internal CMMC assessment, anything like that. And then the cycle starts over and repeats at more controls or building more environments. So one thing that I want to say is that I mentioned was that this isn't a true cycle, right? Some of this can overlap. For example, the GRC team could be doing an assessment at any point, and the blue team guards 24/7, right? So realistically, blue team guards could be the whole cycle with other things inside of it. But I figured this was kind of the simplest way to show it, right? So just keep in mind, the assessments can happen at any time. An incident can happen at any time. The 24/7 monitoring happens all the time. So it's as close to I get with a cycle. All right. So now we're going to talk about the two biggest challenges and the solution that I see for people wanting to be a GRC engineer when they're coming from one side or the other, coming from GRC or coming from blue team. And they're two sides of the same coin, right? So the GRC challenge coming in is you need to know how to write policies that are effective and practical, but also policies that you can understand, right? If you're writing a policy to the blue team that they don't really understand, you can't expect them to put the right controls in place, right? If you're writing a policy that doesn't make sense to, the users, it's the same. They can't follow a policy they don't understand. So it's important that you get that understanding of how can I phrase this to the blue team so that they can understand what controls need to be put in place. Then on the flip side of the same coin is the blue team understanding why controls are being placed, inquired and put in place beyond just its policy. Like they can read it all day and they can say, okay, well, the GRC team says we have to put this in place, so let's do it. But you don't want to just do it. You want to question, not necessarily question their ability to make the right calls, but question why. And, granted, if you know a few things, definitely question, like, what do you mean by that? Things like that. but it helps a lot when you actually understand the idea behind what's happening with that control. It just gives you more insight on the different types of things that you could do rather than just one or two limiting yourself, essentially. So the mutual solution that I found is just cross the knowledge bridges. There's a gap between the two. If you're a solo operator, start learning on each side, kind of in this example, go through those challenges, learn how to do those. If you have a team, ask someone on your team to help, ask someone on the other team to help. And if you're a big organization, they'll probably pay for training, right? So again, it just depends on your size. So now I want to talk about the benefits of GRC engineering, starting with the benefits to the organization, right? So whenever you have a GRC or several GRC engineers in an organization, typically you're going to have stronger security controls, you're going to have better policies, and you're going to have better mechanisms for enforcement. And that's because, again, like I said, when you understand both sides, you have a much better way of making things make sense and making them work the way that they're supposed to, essentially. Next are the career benefits. So when you're able to do two very highly sought after skills at once, your demand in the job market grows and you become what's known as a unicorn, right? Unicorns are sought after by a lot of people in the industry. A lot of companies want someone that can do these jobs, especially the people that are going to pay you to be a solo operator. And that's because typically solo operators are working for smaller companies, sub 1,000 or smaller. It can get up pretty high too, which isn't ideal, but so typically they're going to want to make sure that they have someone who is, who's set up and ready to go. And they trust someone who's been in both sides of the house, either at the same time or separately before. And last on that is financial benefits, right? So dual expertise oftentimes commands higher pay. So, that's exactly how it goes. When you can do something better than someone else, you can get paid better for it. It's that simple. So if you know how the GRC side works and the blue team side works, and you can explain that well in an interview, you can explain that well day to day, you're going to make a lot more. This also works really well for the company because when you're combining roles, you're filling two slots with one person, right? It's a lot cheaper to pay one expert $150,000 a year that can do both jobs than it is to pay two or three $100,000 a year, right? It's cost savings for them and a higher benefit of pay for you. But so now we're going to move to some of the drawbacks, though. And I want to start with what I think is the most important drawback to consider, and that is assessment bias. Assessment bias is essentially, I'm the blue team. I put the controls in place based off of the policies that I wrote, based off how I understood the regulations. Who's checking? Right? Who's checking me? No one. So it's really important that you really scrutinize your work, right? Like what I found that I'll do is, I use resources online, explain this is what this regulation means. This is what your controls mean, blah, blah, blah. Go in, implement, go back, look again, try to look at it from a different angle. And yes, that takes a lot more time. But if you don't do that, that bias could lead to loss of contract. It could lead to like legal issues. So it's really important that you get that right. Next is the implementation speed and overwork. Only having one person or one small team doing simultaneous jobs is going to cause bottlenecks. If you're trying to do two things at once in anything, you're going to get a little bottlenecked on it. And the more the work stacks up, the slower it's going to go. So if you have one person doing everything, it's going to slow down a lot, right? You're going to have to take time, even if it's two people. It's just not the same as having teams. And then the training costs, right? So training a new GRC engineer coming in does cost more in different ways depending on the situation, right? If you're coming in as a solo operator, it's going to, and with, little to no experience, you're going to want to train yourself, right? You might have to use courses online that you have to pay for. There are free ones as well. If you come in and there's a GRC and a blue team aside, or just two people that understand kind of what needs to be done, but they don't know how to do it, you're going to have to take time out of both their days to train, and that's going to take time away from their work, which is going to cost more. If it's worth it, all depends on you. And Flakinator, yes, I completely agree. That's where the trouble comes, where I, as a solo operator, it was a little rough because there is not that person. Luckily, I was able to have, I had people that I could talk to in a way, obviously obfuscate what I'm saying, but ask for opinions. I have really good mentors. I'm not sure if he was able to make it, but really good friend and mentor of mine that got me into GRC Not gonna go to that rabbit hole, but yeah, it can be, you gotta have help. You gotta have help. It's hard. So now we're going to talk about how to build both your skills, right? So for GRC pros who want to learn how to be, get your blue team skills, you have learning sim tools like Splunk, for example, through online courses. I do not recommend buying anything expensive to train with. There's courses, there's labs. If it's cheap, go for it. I know people who were learning and bought, $1,000 home labs. If you want to do it, you can. But there's a lot of free resources online and cheap resources. I like to use Udemy. If you go on Udemy and see a course that's $150, give it 1 to 2 days. It's just a marketing thing. It'll be 15, 20 bucks. That's just kind of how it works. Earn your technical certifications like your Security Plus. This is going to give you kind of a basic idea of what's going on with the security side of things. It's just going to give you your basics kind of understanding. That way you can write your policies and understand your controls a little bit better. And then if you do have a team, if you're not strictly a solo operator and is a small team or a big team, join in on their drills. Ask if you can shadow incident response, their incident responses, right? This is going to depend company to company. For example, incidents can be iffy. They might not want to share that with everybody. Exactly what the issue was, but if you're on the blue team, likely they won't mind. So then going for the blue teamers who want to start learning about GRC, study frameworks like NIST 800-171, 853, kind of get an idea of what those controls actually mean. When you're first starting out, the controls are really daunting. They don't make a lot of sense. And when they do make sense, at first you're probably reading them wrong. Luckily, so 800-171, for example, does have 800-171A that kind of goes through each control. I'm not sure about 53. I haven't gotten to do it a lot or really at all, but that's kind of my experience is mostly with CMMC. Pursue GRC certifications like the CMMC RPA. I'm a CMMC RP. I'm working to get the money to be an RPA. I hope, working with my company to get that covered. But just getting those kind of certifications, especially like the RP, if your company will pay for it. I don't mean get these specifically because the RP is a $600 cert, RPA is $1,000. It's not worth that. That's just an example. If your company pays for it, go for it. But just getting those certifications like that are going to give you an idea. There are non-CMMC specific certifications for GRC as well. That's just kind of what my realm is. And, you can Google those, figure out what GRC certificates are there. I can, add some later, whatever works, right? And then like with the GRC, just assist, right? Get in there, try to go in, sit in on the internal audits, go through the policy reviews, ask questions about the policies, just make it make sense in your head. And if they, you'll have to ask, not every company is going to let you, but if you have the time and they're willing, take them up on that. But again, that does rely on you having, having a team to learn from. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the missing piece here, and that's automation. Automation is a really important part of GRC engineering. When you go to the official GRC engineering site where they talk about things, automation is a huge part of it. Automation can really, really help GRC engineers in a lot of ways, such as automated incident responses, like, locking down an account when they see something suspicious, policy enforcement, like control that enforces MFA, things like, control validation. All of those can be automated. The problem is that typically if you're a solo operator or a small team, you're working on a much smaller budget because typically that means you're working with a smaller organization. So there's a good possibility you might not actually have the resources put into your program to even get these tools. But even if you are, the irony is that you're a solo operator. When are you going to do it? Are you going to do it tomorrow when that new report's due? Are you going to do it during the incident response drill? Setting it up is going to take just as much time as any other work. So the big problem is that those who need the automation the most typically lack the resources to actually implement that automation. All right. So then I want to talk about strategic automation, right? So deploying automation is great. Deploying AI is great. They typically, like nowadays, they're basically going hand in hand. So the one thing you need to keep in mind is that you need a balanced approach to automation. You can't just automate all your tasks. You can do compliance reporting, you can do patch management, you can do these things, but you need to have the human oversight. The last thing I'm going to do is let a bot or an AI or any automation look at the compliance of my organization and say, yeah, you're completely 100% compliant, and then just hand that to a customer, right? You've lost your mind. You need to make sure that you're using automation when you can to make your life easier, but you can't trust it. And we all know right now AI is the big thing, but it's still not perfect. It's going to make mistakes, and you need to make sure that you're following up with any automation, any AI, and ensuring that it's being done properly. That's all I got. So, if you guys have any questions, I'm here to answer, and I'd love to talk about how this could apply to your role and how it could apply to your future.